Tengo el gusto de presentarles a Guillermo González Beristain, quien nos va a introducir a la historia de la gastronomía mexicana. Guillermo es el chef del restaurante Pangea en Monterrey, listado como número 19 de los 50 mejores restaurantes de América Latina.
Buenas tardes, muchas gracias. Es realmente para mí un gran honor estar aquí. Hace 25 años trabajaba yo en Francia, en varias cocinas, no en las mejores condiciones legales, pero fue sin duda un país que me marcó.
It's a very welcoming country, and it's a delight to be here again all these years later. I would have liked to have given my presentation in French, but as we know, French cuisine is just not up to scratch, so I won't be speaking in French, but I will be speaking in Mexican. But please feel free to ask any questions as we go through. I'd like to give you firstly, though, a brief overview of Mexican cuisine. We're going to be looking at some of the major ingredients in Mexican cuisine, and I'll go through some of the major periods through which restaurants have gone through in Monterrey, the region I'm from in Mexico. So, first of all, as you can see on the screen, you'll be able to see some of these different aspects. So can you see on the screen over there? No? So tradition and the cooking in Mexico. I think to really understand the gastronomical diversity of the country, you really have to look at the cuisine in each different region, and it varies greatly across the country. We've always said that the shape of Mexico is a bit like a cornucopia, the horn of plenty, and I think this is actually quite symbolic on many levels. Now, just to give you some basic background, Mexico has been around for 10 million years, 10,000 years, and over time, of generation to generation, ingredients have gradually changed. The best place to eat in Mexico is always in the home, because that's where you eat best, not necessarily in restaurants. Mexico is a country that's had a lot of influence from all around the world, not only the Spanish influence, but also from Africa, North America, and from Asia. And one very important issue is that in 2010, Mexican cuisine was actually listed as part of the world's heritage. And if people don't really know what Mexico looks like, here you have an image of it, and you can see that we have ocean on both sides of the country. On the one hand, you have the Gulf of Mexico, and then you've got the Gulf of California, and then you've got the Pacific Ocean, which means there is a huge variety and abundance of seafood. We've got the U.S. to the north, we've got Belize and Guatemala to the south. We've got a huge variety of different climates. There are warmer and more temperate climates than you have colder climates, but it's a little cooler in the north, to be sure. We have all different kinds of biomes in the country, with rainforests, deserts, mountains, you name it. And all of this actually really does have an influence to the variety of products that are available in the country as well. It's a country where you see a huge variety of flora and fauna, with some 3,000 varieties of fauna. We've got a lot of endemic species in the country as well. And perhaps what is the best known outside of Mexico is the chili and the tomato, which has become part of cuisines all around the world. Corn obviously is a very important ingredient as well. And here you've got some images with different kinds of tomato, corn, maize, and different kinds of chilies. There are also lots of unusual herbs in Mexican cooking. We find that the diet has lesser protein. Traditional cooking had less protein than what you have today, but there's a lot of wild herbs and onions that enrich the sauces. Here you have a whole lot of flowers, many of which are edible flowers. Here, a whole range of fruit. We have a lot of tropical fruit, like the guanabana, like different kinds of papaya, guavas, bananas, a huge variety of tropical fruits. Especially in the tropical zones of the country. Also, we have some quite important root vegetables, such as potatoes and different forms of root vegetable, but also a huge variety of different forms of cacao and coffee can be found. In the central part of the country, the conditions are quite humid, quite damp, with a lot of rainfall, and that is why you get a lot of this particular product in the center, like a goche, like different kinds of endemic produce. The goche is a kind of fungus which affects the corn as it grows, and you have a product like this, which is actually the result of this. Sometimes people call it the Mexican truffle, because it really has quite an unusual flavor. It's hard to describe, quite difficult to describe. You kind of get the feeling of the damp earth, and it's used in different kinds of roasts or stews or casseroles, but particularly in the rainy season you do find this a lot. As I was saying, we've got the Gulf of California and the Gulf of Mexico on one side, the Pacific Ocean, which means that we have a huge abundance of seafood. And the major advantage of the Pacific Ocean is that the colder the ocean current, the more seafood we're able to export. We export tuna, mussels, and a lot of other different kinds of seafood, like clams and oysters. And particularly in the northern part of Baja California, we have a lot of typical seafood dishes. But I'll be focusing on a different region today. In terms of fauna, I think perhaps some of the most widely known and widely exported wildlife would be the different forms of turkey, but you can also in various parts of the country, iguanas and other endemic species were consumed. And another very important feature is what we call milpa, which is corn growing, or the corn fields, from indigenous communities right through to contemporary society. The milpa, the corn growing, has been very important. In the cornfields, around each property, there is a kind of a mini ecosystem, and this is very important. And it brings in together various different forms of produce, such as avocados and corn, and all of the different ingredients that are grown in one little milpa, one corn farm, producing a variety of ingredients that would be required for the local cuisine. There are so many different species of corn. Many are used today, but some came through from the Spanish conquest, but many are actually local. And we have a process called nixtamalization, which is when we first dry the corn and then we soak it and peel it, which makes it much easier to digest. And nixtamalized corn is a major ingredient, and not only to make things like obviously corn is used in our tortillas, our corn tortillas. We also use different forms of avocado to make different sauces. Marango can also be used to make a kind of popcorn. We use it in our tamales. We use it in our different regional dishes. Enchilados are used, escalchos, which is when we basically put the product to cook straight into the braise or the ashes, and so we have various different forms of cooking can enjoy that smoky, woody taste from that kind of cooking. Right back to 1492 or 1521, when we had contact in Mexico with the Spanish conquistadors. This had a huge influence on cuisine in the country, and from that time, beef was used in many of the in regional dishes. Here we have the Yucatan. In 1810, we gained independence from Spain, and from that time on, there was quite a lot of governmental as well as geographical movements. And here you have a map of Mexico, some roughly 100 years ago. You can see how the Mexican diaspora is expanding north and south. And with it, the customs and culture and cuisine moves as well. Here you've had, through the different series of wars and losses and acquisitions of land, you can see how the territory has changed. And Porfirio Diaz had played a major role in our more recent history. After 31 years in power, some people are ashamed of it, some people are proud of it, but the fact is that we've seen a major shift of many ingredients that have been brought in from other countries, such as from French cuisine, which is now fused in Mexico. Here we have the division of the country. We have states such as Tabasco or Veracruz around the Gulf of Mexico, down south of Guerrero or Jaraca. We've got 3 in the northern Pacific corner, Nayarit, for example. Puerto Vallarta, and then fourthly, we've got the Yucatan Peninsula, which is quite different. It really is quite separate, quite different to the rest of the country, and it's a place where the Maya had their civilization. You get places such as Cancun, which I think are very well known, and then the central part of the country, which is where you get Magrefe or Puebla, located in the center of the country. I'm from the Baja California Peninsula, and the north of Mexico has quite a different kind of community to the center or the south. People who live in Monterrey recognize it as quite an industrial city, and we have a lot of Jewish influence in this particular region. And lots of Jewish people took refuge there, and you can see it in the surnames, and also we've also got a lot of influences from the different way in which we grind the flour. We get cumin or oregano, different spices and herbs that have come there, and this is reflected in the kind of how it's filtered into our cuisine. It's a bit of a harsher climate and has a very strongly flavored local cuisine. Products like ceviche and other seafood dishes, some of the cocktails you can find, all of these are different, typical of the coast. You see a lot more mole and a lot of Ricardo Negro, lamb and things. The further south you go in Mexico, and in the center. And I think the cuisine from Puebla is perhaps some of the more complex. They will say the gusanos de maguey, for example, which is a bit of an unusual concept. Some people aren't used to thinking of eating insects, but here, for example, these can be mixed into the tamale, either, and once they're cooked, they're quite crunchy. They've got quite an unusual smell. You can smell. I'll pass them around so you can smell them, and you'll be able to see how you can eat that with a bit of avocado. Here again is another example of these little grasshoppers. It's very similar to a grasshopper, a cricket, and you can grill them or toast them, and again, crunchy, very, very pleasant to taste. And then moving further south again, now in the south of Mexico, you've got quite a different, quite a unique cuisine again. You've got a lot more of kind of mixes made with different kinds of pepper, with oregano. You've got the real kind of hillside climate affecting the cuisine. You get, for example, the pimil cochinito, and this mixes in a slightly more acidic flavors in casseroles. Now, I'd like to give you some examples about Mexican cuisine today. For generations, lots of chefs from around the world came into Mexico, and we didn't have our own history of Mexican chefs. But in the last 15-20 years, this has changed, and I'm known as one of the most impassioned chefs, and I do think that now we have our own homegrown chefs talking about Mexican cuisine. And as I said, the best cooking is in the home, and so we've kind of taken home cooking and brought this to a new level. And so now we can be proud of our history, our own traditions, our culinary traditions, and young people, I think, coming into the profession are really going to change the way that the world perceives Mexican cooking. I think we have things that perhaps a Mexican chef once upon a time wouldn't dare to do. For example, mixing in a little bit of foie gras from elsewhere and putting that with a bit of chipotle. But now we have this sangre de mole negro, for example. We have a suckling lamb cooked in various different kinds of corn and marinade. Guacamole, we might actually put a green apple and spice up the traditional guacamole. They're subtle, very simple changes, but they really do change it. We've got different kinds of salsa verde for fish dishes, different kinds of sauces and marinades. Here we have a pork belly with calidacha and marinated in local ingredients. Here we have some flautas of chicken, cabrito or young goat, alongside with this casserole made of cauliflower. Here you have a mole, a date mole or a date marinade sauce. These are just to give you some idea of what you can find in Mexican cuisine today. Here we have pato con chocolate, but it's not only about using ingredients. I think really what's important for Mexican cuisine and understanding Mexican cuisine is the people. So here what we've got are some basic ingredients. I said how important chilies were, but that's not one in everything. Good Mexican cooking does not have to be hot and spicy. The spiciness should be just a complement to the flavors. So here we've got a whole different variety of chilies. Some use dry, some use fresh. I think the jalapeno is well known, and I'm sure everyone's familiar with the jalapeno chili. Here we have the jalapeno, and it becomes a chipotle once it's dried out, and it has an absolutely delicious smell. We have another kind of jalapeno from another region, which is chiromolita, which is this one here, which are very complex flavors. If you use too much of it, it will be too hot, but it's all a question of dose. The poblano chile, once it's dried, looks like this. This is the Guajillo chilies, which are a bit more acidic. When used fresh, they're quite tart. The chili árbol, like this one here, it's a very common. It's a bit like a Thai chili. Here we have the Serrano chili, which is perhaps the most popular chili in Mexico. You can actually just bite it off raw when you're eating tacos, for example. Here, the Monterrey chili. You'll find the Pekin chili like this one, these tiny little ones. You'll find these everywhere throughout Mexico, but they have different local names. It's actually quite difficult to grow them, and the only way that they actually reproduce is that a bird will come along and ingest it, and then once it's gone through the bird's digestive system and comes out the other end, that's when it can actually be fertilized and grown. So that's why they're so difficult to produce.
Now, we have different lemons, which is not a native product, but it's used a lot in Mexico. Mexicans love to finish things with lemon or lime. Tacos, fish, even a piece of meat. We really like that acidity. We have salt. What we do with worms is that we grind them, we mix them with chili and then salt, and that can go with, for example, a tequila or mezcal. We have chocolate. Mexican chocolate has much more sugar traditionally than European chocolate. Often it has orange rind or different kinds of pepper, and it always has cinnamon. Now, I don't know if you have any questions about this. We obviously brought tortillas. These tortillas are obviously corn tortillas. The flour tortillas are more in the north. In southern Mexico, you tend to have corn tortillas. And we also have these we've fritters that we made with blue tortillas. Now, let me just briefly show you the ceviche. In Mexico, we have several different preparations of raw seafood, especially near the coasts, of course. I think that the most famous country for ceviche is Peru. They've really been able to publicize their gastronomy. But in Mexico, we eat lots of ceviche. Now, before we didn't have limes, so we use different sorts of sour fruits, but today we use limes. Now the ceviche that we have today, we also make it with shrimp, with lobster, and we have a mixture of various ingredients. I don't know if you can see them on the screen, but we have lime juice with olive oil. I like to press the I like to press the lime with my hands, not with any sort of machine, because often that makes it bitter. So I just squeeze out some lime juice with my hands, and then a bit of olive oil. That's a sort of a brine. Then we have a mixture of corns. We have white corn, which is a bit bigger and a bit milder in flavor. Then we have yellow corn. This is more in northern Mexico than in southern Mexico. In general, we used white tender corn. Now this corn is rather tender, so I'm not going to cook it. I'm going to use it raw. And then we have other things in ceviche, coriander. That's very common, and it's very aromatic. We have red onions, a bit of radishes, a bit of zucchini, or serrano chili, cut in very thin slices, and then we have a cream.
La hojasanta es una...
We have what we call jasante, the hoja santa. It's a herb that's typical of Mexico and Veracruz, in particular, also in Oaxaca. It's very aromatic. It's about this big, and when you rub it with your fingers, you get a very sort of anise, very sort of odor. And we use it for making tamales, for instance. Now, with this leaf, we make a kind of cream, and that's really the basis for ceviche. Another thing we do in the restaurant is sort of these onions, which red onions with a bit of oregano and vinegar, and with that we make a puree. Then we sift it, and then we use a kind of seaweed, and that we end up with a sort of gelatin, but that gelatin has a rather sour flavor, and it's very fresh tasting as well. It's a kind of agar. Now, what we do with ceviche, let's begin with the scallops. In general, the scallops are in Mexico. You just have the central part of the scallop. You don't have the red part as you do in Europe. Now, can you see it? These are shrimp, which can be cooked or raw. In Mexico, we have we eat seafood ever more raw. Before we were more cautious, and we tended to cook them, but that's less the case today. Now, I like to marinate this with a bit of lime. 5 minutes or 10 at the very most. I don't really want to change its texture very much or its consistency, especially because this is a very nice scallop. A little bit of salt. And then I'm going to add these coriander leaves. I'm going to let it marinate. Don't leave this out. You put this in the refrigerator or someplace where it will keep cool. And then we have the hoja santa. I brought this from Mexico. It's a little bit wilted, but this is basically what it looks like. At times it can be a lot bigger, and when you rub it or when you strike it, it gives it you have an odor that is like anise. So we're going to start adding the different ingredients to the ceviche. We have the white corn, a bit of yellow corn, raw, as I said. We're going to add a bit of cucumber, very little. A bit more coriander. Some slices of red onions, or a bit of jalapeno chilies, salt, and a bit of this vinaigrette that we made, just enough to cover, and then a bit of green apple too. Now, we also sometimes add pistachios, but we couldn't bring any pistachios along. But it's very good with pistachio nuts, or any sort of nut. In fact, almonds go very well too. They have a different texture, and they also give it a special flavor. The green apple, what it provides, besides its texture, is a different flavor. And then we stir this up. A bit more vinaigrette. And it's all ready. Here's my dish. We're going to first of all put a bit of this hoja santa cream on the plate. And that gives a creaminess. And that will help us sort of bring the ingredients together, and the anise flavor really goes very well with the freshness of the corn and the in this case the scallop. Now, in general, ceviches in Mexico are street food. You eat them in a tostada, which means a fried tortilla, and then you put the ceviche on top. Or you can eat it in these plastic cups mixed with chili, fresh chili, or a certain sauce, sauces that are known as Valentino or Buffalo that the Mexicans really adore. Now, then we put the scallop in. That's enough. I always like to conclude with a bit more lime, or lime juice. And a bit more salt at the end. Here we have the radish. We have some sprouts, radish sprouts, or and here we have a serrano chili sliced. The slice is very, very thin. If you don't like the chili, you can always remove it. But it's really like a very thin piece of paper, and it really adds flavor to it. It's not particularly hot. Basically, one slice per mouthful. Remember what I said about this agar gelatin? In restaurants, people don't necessarily know what it is, and when they taste it, with its acidity, they're really surprised. I mean, that's the Mexicans know this, but not necessarily in that shape. And then avocados, which are traditional. Here we have pieces of avocado.
Y terminaría con un poquito más de aceite de olivo, que es lo que está en la parte de arriba.
And with a bit more olive oil.
Y bueno, para acompañar esto, a lo mejor.
And then a bit of this tostada, I put it on the side. And that's our starter.
¿Alguien tiene alguna duda?
Any questions? The cream is sort of like a very light mayonnaise with olive oil, the hoja santa. We cook it in, we blanch it in hot water, and then we cool it and we blend it. What about the radish, the shoots? They're from here. Actually, it tastes more like clover, but it can be also flowers, or it can be coriander shoots. I mean, people tend to like eating flowers these days. Ceviches before had mayonnaise or guacamole underneath. So yeah, that goes very well with guacamole. I think that, in fact, there's several things involved here. First of all, Mexico, there have been immigrants from many different countries. It's not just traditional cuisine. Secondly, and this is what I like, I'm from Baja California. I grew up eating a lot of ceviche. So I think there's really many influences that I like today. You won't find this perhaps in a ceviche restaurant in Ensenada. But I think that if you eat that, that will remind you of the more traditional flavors. It might be, of course, more sophisticated in a restaurant like Pangea, of course. Have I answered your question? Now, the second dish is, in fact, it's a mixture of flavors. We're going to serve it on Tuesday in a meal that we're preparing. Now, one of the most famous things in Mexico is the mole. Mole really means sauce. In Mexico, there are many different kinds of moles. I don't know whether there's 7 or 10 or 15 versions of mole. The city best known for moles is Oaxaca, but Puebla is also famous for its moles. And it's basically a mixture of different ground ingredients. There are chiles, of course. It can be just one chile. It can be fresh chiles or dried. There are nuts. There's peanuts, almonds, walnuts, pine nuts or pistachios. There can be chocolate, not always, though. There are spices like oregano, bay leaves, cloves, and anise. So in other words, these are very complex sauces, very complex. They are spicy, but at times they are very often sweet too. There are often fruits too. There can be raisins, dates, or prunes, or there can be fresh fruit. Pineapple, peaches, bananas, for instance. So with this, we're going to serve this in a commemorative meal where we want to use both French and Mexican ingredients. It's going to be a date mole. Now, for want of time, the mole has already been made, but it has dried chili, it has lots of nuts, lots of walnuts, a bit of cinnamon, and dates. Why dates? Because in Monterrey there's a great deal of Arab influence. They eat a lot of dates, and they grow a lot of dates in northern Mexico. So we're going to make this mole, which is picante, which is a little bit sweet, and I think that dates add complexity to it. We're going to make a sauce with foie gras. You all know what foie gras is. Foie gras is a product which, of course, is not native to Mexico. It's only eaten in very sort of conventional or French restaurants. So what we did is to take a bit of foie gras and make a puree with mushrooms, seasonal mushrooms, which gives us a slightly thick sauce, rather mild, but with foie gras flavor. The mole is a date mole. It's also rather light. And we have duck breast. We're going to begin with the duck breast. The other ingredients that we have, we have guavas. In Mexico, they're a lot smaller. In general, they're about this big and rounder than this. It looks like a different fruit, but it is a guava. And they tend to be sweeter than that. This one is a bit sourer. What we do is we cook it in a bit of water with a bit of salt. And when it becomes softer, we smoke it with a bit of mesquite wood. We smoke the puree a bit. So therefore, you have something which is both sweet, slightly sour, and also smoky. And then we make a brine. That's the conventional preparation that we made to preserve products. It can be sardines, or it can be vegetables or chicken. So this is a preparation with a lot of vinegar and some sort of aromatic herbs, such as, well, in this case, oregano. And then we have a sweet ingredient, which is the guava. But we also have a slightly acidic aftertaste, which we can get from, for example, a carrot in brine. And then we're now sautéing the duck breast. We take a knife and we score the skin. We don't cut through to the meat. And that will help to drain the fat out faster. We seal it on both sides, a bit longer on the skin side, so the skin will be as thin as possible and a bit and have be a bit crusty. Now then, what we do with the mole, this mole is warm. It's a bit lighter than what we usually get with mole. We have the sauce for the mushrooms and a bit of foie gras. Here's the guava puree, slightly smoked. And we have this carrot puree. A bit of roasted carrots, a bit of onions that are slightly seared or charred on the outside. And you can see that the skin is really marked. What we do in a restaurant is we put this in an oven, which makes it easier to cook it evenly. And you don't have to burn the skin. Another thing that we do is when we bring out a big piece like this, a big breast or a big piece of meat from the frying pan from the oven, is we let it rest for 5 to 7 minutes in order to make sure that the juices will go back into the meat. If you suddenly cut it while it's hot, a lot of the juice will drain off onto the cutting board. What we do with this is put a bit of salt on it. We serve this with tortillas. Small tortillas, freshly made. And finally, let me make a dessert, which is really very simple to make. Perhaps you won't be able to make this duck at home, but I'm sure you can make this dessert. It's a dessert that we made like about 20 years ago in a restaurant that I was working in. And today I make it at the Pangea restaurant. And I've always felt that this dessert has really made it possible to earn lots of things. You have a mango. I prefer sort of Manila mango, a bit more oval and smaller. But in France, it might be difficult to get all sorts of mangoes. So this is fine. It's important for it to be firm and ripe. that is ripe but not too soft. It's best to buy a green mango and to wrap it in a newspaper and then put it somewhere in the kitchen for a few days and let it ripen. Not, that's the sort of thing you can do with an avocado too. Now we have mango. Where's the ice cream? You have hibiscus flowers. That's not Mexican either. That comes from the Arab countries. But in Egypt, you can drink that hot. But in Mexico, you tend to drink it cold with a lot of sugar, and it's very refreshing. Slightly acidic too. And we have flour tortillas. Flour tortillas are the white ones, which you find more in northern Mexico. We cut them in a julienne, we fry them, we add sugar and a bit of cinnamon, trying to emulate a very Mexican dessert called the buñuelo or the fritter. Now we have this is the hibiscus sauce. All we do is we put the hibiscus flowers in cold water. We light the stove and we let it infuse gradually. When it's infused, we turn off the stove. We let it rest for another hour. We add a bit of sugar, and if necessary, we use a bit of corn flour, and we end up with a sauce like this, which is sweet and also slightly sour. And this is a red fruit puree. They can be blackberries or strawberries or raspberries. Then we're going to cut the mango. We cut off a mango half. And since this mango is very big, I'm going to also cut off the second half. But normally what I do is I would take this as is, and I would remove all the pulp, but this is very big. So since I have the two halves, let me take one. Let me remove the pulp. I'll try not to break the skin. And let me then cut this into cubes. So you have the mango, and we use this to stuff it with the other half. I'm going to try to do the same thing that we did with the duck skin, that is cut it without, cut the mango pulp without reaching the skin. This is a very ripe mango. You can see the juice coming out. We cut this. And then you turn it out, and this is really decorative, and it's also a lot easier to eat the mango when it's prepared this way. Then we take a bit of this hibiscus sauce. Then we put the mango here. Oh, sorry, the berry sauce, the red fruit sauce, not the hibiscus sauce. And then we have coconut ice cream. We make a toasted coconut ice cream in the restaurant. Here we could, what we did here was to buy vanilla ice cream and mix roasted coconut in it because we couldn't get the proper coconut ice cream. No, in general, we want to make a quenelle, but the ice cream isn't soft enough to mold it. In general, we make a prettier quenelle than with this. And then at the end, we add a bit of hibiscus sauce. We've also made this with the cactus flower, the nopal, as well, and that's also acidic. And we make a sort of sherbet with it, with mango or with passion fruit, and then we add these fried tortilla, these fritters, and a bit more shredded coconut. You can do this at home. Very well. Do you have any questions? No? So those are the three dishes. I think that do you have any questions about this?
Sí. Hojas de Jamaica.
Hibiscus flowers, water, sugar, and a bit of corn flour. That's all. Were you given the printed recipes? No? Or you can also use passion fruit. Or you can use blackberries, which are a bit sour. Thank you very much for that superb master class. Now we'll have a short break before the second and last master class of the day with Angel Vasquez. Thank you. And now we're going to have a short break.